Hi there, and welcome to Unleash This, presented by Unleashed Technologies. I'm Dustin Hickle. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Unleashed, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's episode. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Today, we're going to talk about custom applications, but kind of through the story and the experience and the lens of an ex-Apple developer that we have on our staff. She's currently the lead symphony architect here at Unleashed, Beth MackniK. Say hi, Beth.
Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Good. Very good. Very good. A humble response to a pretty good title, I would say, right? Being an ex-Apple executive, but we expect nothing less from you, Beth. Wonderful, wonderful person. Wonderful to have on our team. Well, I don't want to linger too long on this part of the story, but we would be remiss if we didn't take a little bit of a look at your background, what you've done in your career, how you got so involved in application development as a career. So just walk us through kind of how that got started, how you got to where you are, how you got so interested in development, that kind of thing. And we'll start the conversation there.
Okay. Well, I started, I had access to computers at home. My father was an astronomer and engineer, and he built our first home computer. And I started programming it as soon as I had that available and was able to sit and teach myself how to work with it. This is before the PC even existed, so it was quite a fun time to be in that space. And from that, my first job as a high school student, I worked at the Institute for Astronomy on Maui at one of the observatories there, not one my father was associated with, as a programmer. Working on some astronomy related to sunspots and tracking them, and it was a wonderful introduction to programming, and hopefully they felt like they survived the teenager. But that's how I started working in coding, and just I fell in love with the fact that I could build things, and I really enjoyed creating solutions through programming. That was just from the get-go. That was my favorite thing to do. And then I ended up continuing to work programming for the local electric company. I did some in college, and worked on my degree in electrical engineering with an emphasis in computers. So that's how I got started in all of it. And worked a variety of places, but probably the most notable is I spent a decade at Apple. And one of the first things I built there was the first customer relationship management program at Apple. Was a custom app that we developed with a team of 3 people putting together to track all of Apple's customers in the United States. That was a U.S.-oriented program, and from there I went on to working on more focusing in the education division at Apple and doing the first ecommerce system for that, which is first online sales, which became a configure to order. So you could do custom builds of computers, which was the first time Apple really went into that world. And we were moving from being a manufacturer that sold to retailers to directly selling to customers. And so it was the first time that we were really directly selling to, we started with K-12 teachers, actually, because we had a discount program for them. Originally, it was through retailers. Then we started doing it directly, and we started saying things like, you can pick the size of your hard drive. You can pick how much RAM you want. Those kinds of things was the first thing we built. And we ran into all sorts of interesting challenges with that, because our enterprise system for running the actual manufacturing wanted part numbers for any machine that you wanted to ship. And the team that was working on that piece of it was like, well, they were going to pre-create the part numbers until they realized that we needed over 4 million of them, and that was probably going to gum up the works because of just the permutations. And so they created a system for creating them on the fly. So if somebody ordered something, they actually were initiating the whole process to create a part number at Apple, because it was amazing how many of them were unique. When we first did this hadn't been done anywhere systematically from any of our competitors, and we discovered in the business everybody wanted something different. We ended up using 1 million part numbers. So that was pretty, it was eye-opening to us because we didn't know that about our own business, that our customers wanted so many different minor changes, but it made them happy. So that was a really big win for us. And from there, Apple went on. We developed a team that was done with some developers outside and internal. We developed an internal team that built the Apple Store that goes. And one of the reasons that it moved to that is that when we built this online system to go direct, within a year, it was doing 40% of our business.
Amazing. I mean, and it happened so fast. I remember, 4 million different, part numbers. So I assume that's, different RAM levels, different memory levels, all those different things. I don't know how many options there were, but rightly, so you start, all the permutations. If you have 80 different options or 5 different options in 20 different areas, you start blending them together. The number of unique parts starts to add up really, really fast.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we discovered in it. And we were able to do that. In terms of the assembly line and such, it wasn't, but we just never had the systems before. And we discovered new parts of business. We built a system and then that showed us the new business capabilities in terms of configured order. And it was only K through 12 that we were doing that with originally. And that ended, the Apple Store was developed with that from the get-go for everybody to be able to configure their systems.
That's cool. And then 40% of your business being done online pretty shortly after that. You said within a year. Talk about making a difference and building something that has a positive ROI value, which we talk about around here all the time, and we'll talk about more later. But that's something to hang your hat on, I feel like.
It was pretty exciting, so we really we loved it, and so did our folks internally. And we went into the Apple Store and got into a real iterative development of trying different things to find what our clients needed in terms of our customer base, and being able to be really responsive to that.
That's awesome. And at the time, right, that's a big out of the box, application solution. Nobody had necessarily thought about it that way before. You guys built something unique there. And you and I have conversations a lot. I'm sure other people had, but not maybe at Apple. You guys did something kind of unique and special there. It was pretty cool. But you talk often, and we talk a lot internally about like the diversity of what you can do with a custom application. We've even thrown around the thought, like, if you have an idea or you have a problem or you have a challenge, like, chances are we can solve that with some form of custom application. So going back through your history and the things that you've worked on, what would you consider to be the most out of the box application that you've worked on? Something unique and kind of custom and not off the shelf.
Okay. Well, almost everything I do ends up being pretty unique because if it's off the shelf, you just go buy it off the shelf. Right. I highly recommend that. Then, if what you need is already out there, but there's lots of things. People don't realize how many different things they can really customize and control when they do custom software. One of the things we did at Apple was a program called SBAPS, in which was we had field technicians that would come do installations of computers at schools. And this was important to schools. They don't had their business like in terms of their ordering. They order, 100 computers, but they don't have IT people in the elementary school. And so they wanted a technician to come out, set up the computers, make sure they're working. You do get occasional DOAs. We tried to keep that percentage really low, but they happen. And they didn't want to have the kindergarten teacher trying to figure out whether it was the machine wasn't working or she was having trouble setting it up. So we'd have a technician go out, set up the machine, and we worked with third party partners on that. They weren't Apple employees. It was different businesses in different parts of the country, and so what we did was we set up a system that fed out of our shipping information and knew who the providers were around the country and created a tool for them. So it was a collaborative work on developing it. So what do you guys need in terms of on this tool? But they could log in and they'd get a list of schools they needed to go to and when the equipment was going to show up. So it was tied into our shipping information from Apple and would update if something changed. If the truck's not going to make it on Tuesday, it's going to be there on Wednesday. And so and the phone number for the school and who they should contact at the school saying, hey, your computers are coming in and we're going to show up and set them up for you. And then they could actually put in all of the information that, yes, we set this up. They would also do some feedback into it that helped the schools with the inventory. So they would say, okay, these serial numbers were installed in this classroom and we'll feed into the system, and then we would feed that back to the schools. So the schools didn't have to go do inventory and figure out which machine was where. They were happy. Our third-party provider got paid, per machine for setup. They were happy. They were authorized technicians, so they would actually bring equipment with them to fix a computer. They would have spares and such if one was DOA, which would happen, a small percentage of the time, and generally just made it a wonderful opening experience for the school and not something the teachers had to add on to their workday when it's not really their field.
Yeah, see, that makes total sense, right? It's you don't want to have a non-technical person set up a computer, like you said, because you don't want to allow confusion. You don't want to have, someone say, hey, this machine didn't work, but really it did. And then, Apple and the technician and everybody's playing a game of telephone to figure out, did it work? Did it not work? Whose responsibility is it? So this is really interesting, right? What you guys enabled was better service, right? But you did it through an application that synced up with your shipping and inventory systems, and also synced up with external vendor partners who could help install those systems for you, right? And that's a piece of software that connects all those things that maybe people don't necessarily think about. That's a software, right? That's something that you build, or an application right there that facilitates all of that information transfer and that inventory tracking. That's pretty out of the box, right? Let's help these technicians install these computers and track these computers and help these schools get up to speed faster with a piece of technology. Really pretty cool. So I would say, the next question is talking about ROI, which we've talked about a little bit. I would say that one probably had a pretty high ROI, but maybe if you can come up with another tool that you've built that was the most practical, the most measurable, like results, like you built an application and you immediately saw big, large scale impact for the company that you built it for.
Yeah, sure. I worked with a European railroad company, national railroad company, to do some automation around their preventative maintenance program on their equipment. Rolling stock, locomotives, all need to have certain amounts of preventative maintenance. They have a window that they're supposed to be in. If you go, 25,000 kilometers, you're supposed to go have the brakes worked on, that kind of thing. So they had rules about it. Like if it hits 28,000, it immediately has to come out of service, and you can't have it rolling around because that's a safety issue then. But they really want it to go 24,999 because then it's available and they're not paying for more than they need to be doing. So this was an optimization package that just looked at all of where are things, where are all the rolling stock, where are they going to be, and where are the maintenance facilities around the country. So when is this piece of rolling stock going to be close to maintenance? And it came up with some, when we started working with it, it came up with some unusual answers. Sometimes it sent a piece of rolling stock in for maintenance at 20,000 kilometers, and which seems to not make a lot of sense, except that piece then was going off into a part of the country that had no maintenance facilities. And in their old paper system, What they would have had to do was take a locomotive, go pick up that rolling stock, drive it across the country, basically, get it to a maintenance facility, and then drive it back. So we were doing it, anticipating what was going to be happening in terms of their shipping needs in rolling stock. What happened overall was they had about 10 to 15% higher availability of rolling stock. This stuff was expensive. That was a huge amount of money they didn't have to spend on buying new box cars and tankers and such, because all of the ones they had were more available.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, and that's all stuff that we, as your typical like drivers on the road or people who are consumers of goods, like we want those things to just work, right? We don't want brakes on a piece of rolling stock to go bad, right? We don't we don't want things to be broken down and have cost of goods be more expensive because someone has to send a locomotive across the country to get one single car and drag it back and then take it back again. Like all of those things are cost cutting initiatives. All those things are beneficial. And again, we're talking about a piece of technology that can anticipate future needs even at this point, which was really cool. I'd never heard you talk about rolling stock that would come in early ahead of schedule, which would probably confuse people if they were doing it by paper. Why is this thing here? But because the system that you guys built knew, man, this thing is going to be out and away from anywhere that it can be fixed for a long, long time. So let's make sure it's prepped ahead of time. That way we're not running any risks when it comes back. Amazing, really cool piece of technology. And railroad, right? Again, an industry where maybe you don't think of as a technologically savvy industry. It's not like a software as a like a SaaS industry. It's not heavily online necessarily.
It's definitely not Silicon Valley. No.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's not Silicon Valley. And yet, building these technologies, these pieces of custom software, these custom applications being extremely impactful. Okay, so I'm just going to keep rolling because I love when you get a chance to talk about the things that you've worked on in the past. But the next question is going to be maybe more a little future vision focused. You look around, you do things day in and day out. You're probably like me on the marketing side. I'm analyzing every, ad or commercial or whatever that's served to me for why they did what they did, what's the angle they're going, what's the psychological approach, why they choose that color. I'm sure you're doing the same thing on the technology side. So as you look around, especially related to the B2B e-commerce landscape, what app do you see needing to be developed that's not out there, right? What would be most helpful if more companies built something like that?
The things that are probably universally needed more right now is workflow optimization.
Okay.
Everybody's talked about in the past 2 years about, they're having trouble hiring. And some of that is a post-COVID world, but a lot of it is the baby boomers are retiring. And Generation X isn't that big behind it. And Generation Z isn't either. So it's going, the hiring pinch is going to be around and it's going to stay. So doing things as an optimization to get more from your existing staff without stressing out your existing staff to the point where they want to leave is a big win. If people can do 20% more work and without having to, because they've got more automation available, that makes that's a win for everybody. It's a win for employers and people who are trying to just do their jobs. So when you have things that work well within your job, and you have tools that work well, it makes you happier.
Yeah, for sure. And so, give us an example. Give us an example of something like that maybe you've built. I'm sure you have. I know the answer, right? I get to see behind the curtain and see the script coming up, right? But
Sure.
Tell us about an example of something like that.
There was a company that was acquiring land for grazing, basically, grazing rights. So they would lease out land or buy it sometimes, and they wanted to have contiguous pieces because you really don't want to have to go pick up the cattle and then drive them over to the other ranch. That's expensive. It's much nicer if they can just walk. And it turns out that in the West, there's lots of work on different leases and getting pieces back and forth. And also determining who owns a piece of land turns out to be fairly complicated. It's not hard when somebody has a piece of land, it's my land and I'm working with it. But what happens when grandma dies and nobody actually does a will and figures out who owns the land now? And they haven't done that. Grandma died in 1950. Now there's grandchildren, great grandchildren, who owns what percentage, and you're wanting to get rights to move across this land, but you can't find anyone who can actually sign the paperwork. They'd all be happy to receive a little money to have cattle walk across your land, but you need to have that approval. So there's a company that was working on developing that information on a large scale for large scale ranching needs, and they would send people out to counties to pull the paperwork, and then start digging down and pull more paperwork. All right, so this was owned by so and so, and then here's a death certificate, and let me go see what children they had and what marriages they had. And, it turns out to be this very complicated title piece. And there's a lot of software out there for title companies that you use when you're trying to do your house. But it turns out that grazing rights can be a separate legal entity on property. And title companies are really focused on who owns this piece of land as opposed to trying to do groups that are tied together. They don't really care as much about that. So they wanted a piece of custom software where they could track all of this history and figure out, okay, we've got 4 different possible ways we can do a route on this. Which one's going to be the cheapest for us to go into court and actually get the court to say who owns the land so we can get signatures? Because that was their deal with people. They'd say, hey, we'll go in. We want to have grazing rights for next year. And what we're going to do is we're going to go get you clear title to your land. We're going to do the legal work for you. You'll own it. You sign grazing rights for X amount of time for us, and everybody's happy. And generally people didn't have the money, didn't have the legal expertise to go do that for themselves. So they always ended up with a lot of win-win situations there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're saying, so I'm understanding, right? The software would be able to look at who owns, or if they knew who owned each of those pieces of lands that could create the bridge or could create that connection point, and point out this one's going to be a disaster because we have no clue, and this one over here is going to be fantastically easy because we know that it's this person or this person's next generation down, right?
Yes.
So the software would be able to comb through all of that data, all of those legal documents, and spit out an answer.
Yeah, that's right.
The parcels of land.
And for the most part, it wasn't making a decision because sometimes you don't really want the software doing that. But every time someone was looking at it, an expert was, as in their organization was looking at it, they could put the information in, and then that was putting it on the map. So it was doing color coding on the map of this will be easy, this will be hard. The orange ones are going to be more difficult because we haven't found the errors yet. We haven't found, that kind of thing. Or great grandma has 72 people that will have to go get sign off on this, or much harder. So those were the pieces they worked with, and it made them pretty happy to be able to do that. And it's just what they were doing originally was they were sending people out to the county courthouses, collecting information, collecting the names, coming back, collating it, getting lists of names of people that they needed to find, heading back to county courthouses to go find those pieces, collect that information. And it was just an iterative back and forth process that took months and months, and they could go much quicker. And you have to think they're driving from courthouse to courthouse in West Texas, so doing that loop multiple times through was very inefficient. And this just made it all flow better and kept the data together for them. And it certainly wasn't something that you could get off the shelf. Nobody had the ability to just keep track of all of these relationships in a piece of software.
Yeah, fantastic. Right. It's not just as simple as going down to the courthouse and picking up the county record, right? Because there's a lot more intricacy than that. So, okay. So, as you know, you've been on the podcast before. One of the questions that we like to ask revolves around kind of our mission and our vision and some of our core beliefs and principles as a company about doing work that impacts underserved populations. And so I know that you've done applications in a wide variety of industries, but maybe let's talk about any applications that you've worked on that served underserved populations, what it did, how did it work? Maybe give us a picture or a little glimpse into your life and what you've built on that front.
Sure. I've done several, but one of the ones that I was really proud of was a piece of software we did for USAID, and that's the federal government's outreach agency or independent agency for Haiti. And this was a number of years ago, and working on reducing AIDS impact in Haiti. And what they discovered was, one, of course, there's a stigma of getting tested for AIDS and checking with it. So people didn't want to go and ask, where can I go get tested for AIDS? And they were also had a pretty high illiteracy rate in their community. So what they wanted to do was come up with a way to connect people with where is the location of AIDS testing clinics, without them having to ask someone else. They could just download an app on the phone, but also be able, ideally, to serve this population in addition that was illiterate, but still could manage to manipulate things. So we made an app where you could go and you could look up where's my nearest clinic, and it would use your GPS location and then tell you where the nearest clinic was to you and the address. But for the illiterate population that had trouble using that written description, it also was you could take your phone and put it out like this, and like the Compass app, it would point and give you, and we'd do a width based on how far away you were from the nearest clinic. So you could walk and go, okay, there's one that direction, and it would put down how many. Can't remember if it was miles or kilometers, honestly, what your distance was. And sometimes folks could generally navigate that, but they could use that to go, and they didn't have to ask anyone. And so they had a big uptick in the number of people getting tested, which, they said was absolutely critical to stopping transmission, was just getting the knowledge out there for was infected.
And what a good idea, for someone who you can't put signs up, right? You can't send a text message. You can't send some sort of alert that has verbiage on it, right? Because this is an illiterate. Generally, this part of the population struggle with literacy. And so what a great idea to use a compass that would get closer or bigger or let you know you're going the right direction. And I know that you'll sit here on this podcast and not say that it turned out to be an idea that came out of your head to come up with that compass idea, but I will say it for you. Brilliant idea. Really, really cool solution.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up here. We'll keep this one nice and tight. I have one question left for you. And it has to do with helping our clients who maybe this conversation is helping them go, oh, wow, okay, we can solve what with application development? Like what type of challenges could we solve at our organization? And it's getting those wheels spinning. But I want to make sure that people who come to have a conversation with us have some level of coaching and preparation from you and from others on our team. So that way we can help them kind of map out the system or map out the application as efficiently as possible, help to provide that high ROI, help to provide those quicker speed to market type of kind of goals that most of our clients have. So are there any common best practices that a prospect or a client can do on their end before engaging with a developer or an agency like us on an application project? What best practices could you lay out for them?
I'd say the first thing is to really get all of the internal stakeholders together, identify who inside your organization benefits or is impacted by a new piece of software, a new capability, because you need to get some buy-in, and you also sometimes there's like really little things, really little, easy to implement things that make people's lives 100 times better, and they don't know that that's even possible. So getting these voices in usually magnifies the impact of any software that you do, and usually for very little additional effort or cost on it. But it also they can also bring up issues in the development discussion. So keep away from some pitfalls that you maybe didn't know about your business because it's someone else's department, right? That's an absolutely helpful item. And I would say probably the second thing is to make sure you're communicating with us as developers. We need to know what you're concerned about, where your is your budget really tight? Let us know. We really got to stay in this budget. We can't afford to go beyond it. It's like, okay, we'll help you manage that and make sure we focus on the features you most need so that we stay within your budget. If the thing is that you need to have these 3 features that must happen and must work smoothly, then that's the thing you need to tell us, and then we'll be focusing on it. We want to align with what works for you, because our job really is to make your business work better. We do that by building software, but the goal is to optimize your business needs, so just keeping that communication going in terms of things. I think sometimes folks are like, I'm not going to tell them that this is an issue or budgets or whatever. They don't want to discuss it. And, everybody has limits, and we just need to know which ones are most important to you so that we align with your interests.
I think that's great feedback. We use the word partnership around here a lot. It needs to be an open, honest, transparent partnership with good communication. I think you're right. We've seen some instances where it almost feels like the prospect or the client just doesn't want to tell us something. And at the end of the day, man, if you just tell us, we're going to be able to actually help you, because now we actually know the specific challenges you're dealing with, the specific things that are keeping you awake at night, and we can come alongside and help you. So Beth, that's, I think, a really good piece of coaching there. You even said, to me one time, we don't want our clients to bring assumptions to the table, right? There's a lot of flexibility. We can do a lot of things. So don't assume we can, don't assume we can't. Let's talk about it, because generally we can. Definitely don't assume we can't, right? I think that's great.
I can't tell you how many times a client has said, oh, I'm sorry you can't do this. And I'm like, oh, we can do that. That's easy. Would you like that? and their eyes light up. It's like something I like deliver, add to the code for the next day, because people tend to come to software and think this will be hard and this will be easy. And a lot of times on the back end, in the world where we're programming, there's not a lot of connection with sometimes things that seem easy are hard, and the other way around. So don't come in with assumptions. Ask, can I get X? How so give us the list of things that your wish list, and then let's talk about which part of that wish list you can get within your budget, and we will work to make that happen.
I love it. Collaboration, right? That's what it's all about. Well, hey, thank you so much, Beth, for jumping on this podcast with me, for sharing your experience, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. Like I've said before, you bring a certain level of humility, even to the vast amount of experience that you have. It's always a pleasure talking with you. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Duncan.
Yeah. So, hey, if you guys who are watching want to get in touch with us, unleash-technologies.com is the place to go. You can find myself or Beth on LinkedIn. We're also happy to connect with you there. And until next time, keep that technology unleashed.